This video is brought to you by Squarespace. It's going to be the longest video I've probably ever made, I suspect. So my friends, I just got back from Ukraine. I travelled through old war zones. There were air attacks. It was mental. This trip recently, it massively opened my eyes on a number of topics. Things to do with culture, community, economy, war, immigration, and my own country, Britain. So I really wanted to tell this story for a long time because it's very personal and it's from my life. But it wasn't until I came back from this most recent trip that I felt I was ready to tell this story. So this one might be a bit different than usual, it might be a bit longer, but today I will tell you how Ukraine changed my life. Jesus Christ. So you might be wondering, why, Jimmy, would you go to Ukraine, a country at war? Why would you do that? Well, it wasn't even my first time. I've been quite a few times. And for me to explain it, our story really has to start all the way back in 2023. I was a young, single bruh, living his best life, and me and my mate decided to go to Thailand, just to be absolute bloody Instagram vibe boys. Just vibe turkeys, you could call us. So I went for a month, and one day toward the end of the trip, right, me and my friend, it was the last day we had in this town called Ao Nang, and I toddled on in to a little coffee shop. And as I walk in, I get my eggs Benedict and avocado toast, and I look around, and I see the single most gorgeous woman I've ever seen. So I bolster my chest into the air, I stroll over, Mr. Confident, and I say, "Hello, you're very beautiful." We had a nice conversation, we went on a date, and I basically instantly fell in love. I'll spare you all the romance, but jump forward a little bit. Me and this lady I met, whose name is still Vlada, we start a long distance relationship. We're meeting each other every single month in different countries, typically in Eastern Europe. And the thing about Vlada, right, is that she is from the country of Ukraine. We got about 3 hours to Lviv. The border probably is going to take a couple hours. I'm not going to get into the whole details of how I got to Ukraine. It's a mission. It takes probably 24 plus hours. You literally see tanks on the back of lorries, military checkpoints, anti-tank hedgehogs. It's intense. But anyway, I arrive after this insanely long trip and I see Vlada. I say, "I missed you, babes. You're the love of my life," all of them ones. And then I wake up the next day and I got to experience the city of Lviv. And my God, it is a beautiful place. So nice, so chill, such a chill atmosphere. Now, bearing in mind most of my childhood, my image of Eastern Europe, it was like Gopniks in Adidas tracksuits. I think I remember sending a shoebox of toys at Christmas to some Ukrainians or something like that. Your image of Ukraine is of this very brutalist, post-Soviet, kind of depressing, poor place. And Lviv just shattered that mental image. You're walking on like these cobbled streets and you see all these beautiful, stunning, classical buildings. Everyone around you is cooler than you, dressed cooler than you. They're just stylish, chill bras. Every single restaurant and cafe is on the level of like the coolest of coolest thing you'd find in London. Even better in some places. The food, the bakery, the things they make is so creative. The coffee. I literally became a coffee snob because of that trip in Lviv.
Found the best coffee in Lviv. This one was highly recommended, Svitkava. And it is honestly 10 out of 10.
And you start noticing when you deal with the businesses how modernized they are. Like when you're using, you go on their Instagram, they've laid it out really nice. It's logical. The menus are all there. You can pay by scanning a QR code on your table. All of their marketing's amazing. Every single restaurant is like trendy with amazing interior, like something on Pinterest. And very specifically, and this is a thing you'll notice, is every single toilet is like spotless. You almost look forward to going for a shit in these places. Every bathroom is nice and clean. Every single one of them, they're all nice. Clean, tidy, looked after. There's no tissue paper on the floor. Nice quality soap. Isn't something I really ever thought about, but my wife always pointed it out, and I kind of realised it's true. When you go to Britain, toilets are shit, the lid's hanging off, toilet paper everywhere. Soap will be the cheapest Tesco option you can possibly find. And so yeah, I'm in this place that 5 minutes before I thought was destitute, and now I'm having flashbacks of where I'm from in Britain, where you walk into a restaurant and you have to spend like 90 minutes with your neck like this trying to get someone to serve you. They then eventually come over and grace you with their presence. Maybe if you're lucky, they clear off the last person's cheeseburger that's sprawled across the table. You go to the toilet, there's no toilet paper because it's all on the floor. And then after you've had your shitty burger, some sticky toffee pudding and a beer, you get handed your £50 bill and told to fuck off. And so yeah, as I've come away from it and read more about Ukraine, its economy, it gave me some really interesting insights into the evolution and the different stages of capitalism.
Ever since the coup, the political momentum towards independence has become unstoppable.
So as most people will know about Ukraine, it was once in the USSR, where, to be honest, it got a pretty rough deal. There's many things I could point to, but one of the most well-known was the Holodomor famine. Famine which was man-made by the Soviet regime that killed millions of Ukrainians. So modern Ukraine as it exists today is in this really interesting period whereby after the fall of the Soviet Union in the 90s, it was granted independence and recognized by Russia and America and everyone, and it had to completely rebuild its entire economy pretty much on its own. My now wife, Vlada, she grew up in a very small rural town, which on my most recent trip to Ukraine, I had the incredible experience of visiting. For me, as someone raised in like a very urban, very capitalist Britain, I've always been quite fascinated by the idea of going to visit a completely different way of life, a way of life that really doesn't exist in the UK. In rural Ukraine, people like Vlada's parents, they will own giant farms. They just call them gardens, they don't even call them farms, it's how common they are. Which on that land, they will grow their own food, their own vegetables, some will raise animals, they might also plant flowers. They do this, and this is very common for most rural Ukrainians, they'll do this whilst also working a full-time job. Now for Vlada's parents, they work, it's not very well paid, they'll genuinely get the equivalent of about £200 a month. And this right here was really one of the first major insights I took from Ukraine. Before we go any further with this video, I want to give a massive shout out to today's sponsor, Squarespace. Squarespace is the #1 website for building your own beautiful, dynamic, trendy website. My favorite thing about Squarespace is the cutting edge design tools. By using their Blueprint AI, anyone can have a perfectly customized and bespoke website. You can just type into the AI what your industry is, what the goals are for your website, and it will create a personally designed website filled with content and an amazing looking design. And from their award-winning templates, you can just pick and choose any of the designs that you like and really just make your website stand out. A big part of running an online business these days is email marketing. In Squarespace, you can now do all of your email marketing. You can design it, manage it, and send them out. Anytime in the past that I've ever wanted to make a website, I've always just gone straight to Squarespace. It's really quick, really intuitive, and honestly quite fun. So be sure to head to squarespace.com/Jimmy the Giant, and to get 10% off your first purchase of a website or a domain, use the code Jimmy the Giant. Anyway, back to the video. Now I really want to be like kind of mindful how I word this, but whilst objectively speaking, someone living in rural Ukraine will earn very, very little money, I would argue in some regards, they live a much more fulfilling life than poor people would in the UK. Now, I remember my wife originally telling me this, that she thought that, and I kind of pushed back on it at first because, you know, there's many things that British people have here that they wouldn't have in rural Ukraine. But she was right. So let's do it. Let's compare poor person in Ukraine versus a poor person in Britain. So a poor person in the UK would likely live in an area that is pretty run down. There's probably lots of crime, there's probably gangs, homelessness, drug addiction. It's probably all quite visible. They probably see it every day when they take public transport to work. When it comes to work, they'll probably be in like some 0-hour contract, some very precarious job that they can get fired from very easily. Like very soul-crushing kind of jobs like night shifts in warehouses, delivery drivers, Uber Eats, this kind of thing. They probably live in a very low-quality apartment that they don't own, so they're paying half of their salary a month sometimes on rent. Will also be surrounded by neighbors who probably don't live there for very long, like they might spend a couple years and then move to the next place. And so this results in many of these people not really knowing their neighbors or putting the effort to get to know them. So there's kind of no feeling of like a local community as such. And when it comes to the local town, it is probably in a very underfunded part of Britain where many of its community places will be shut down, along with many pubs and other third places. And when it comes to finance, yeah, they're going to be paying most of their money on rent. They'll have little money for emergencies. So say the moped that they use for work breaks down. In order for them to repair it, they will likely have to go and get into debt. The money they have left over for food will typically result in them buying low quality frozen meals from the cheapest place possible. They can struggle to afford heating. They probably don't always heat their house. And if they have any money left over, they probably can't afford to really go socializing with their friends or family. So all in all, it is a pretty miserable life. Now, in the UK, they are afforded some benefits. So they might get paid some housing benefits. They also do have access to the NHS and a pension. These things are good, and this does separate us from, say, Ukrainian poverty. But their life, their working life, is filled with constant anxiety and never a feeling of true stability. The worry about money is constant. Now, when it comes to Ukraine, I do imagine that people in poverty in urban areas like Kyiv, etc., I imagine their experience might not be too dissimilar. However, if we're to compare the life to someone in rural Ukraine, it is very different. So in Ukraine, right, after the collapse of the Soviet Union, basically whatever was left of the government just gave out land and houses. And so people took ownership of large chunks of land and houses to live in. Genuinely, I'm not kidding you, your average old lady in poverty in Ukraine will own the equivalent amount of land as what would make you a millionaire in the UK. It's worth pennies, like it's really not worth anything. And on that land, they will use it to grow produce. It's like the backbone of their culture is growing fresh fruit and veg, and they're like, it's their thing, they love it. And so you got to think, the access to food, even at that level, is way different. The food is going to be incredibly high quality. It's fresh from their garden without pesticides and growing it to last as long as possible. They can just eat fresh, high quality food. And like, it's not uncommon. They'll have these like store cupboards in the ground where they will make their own jams and pickled things in jars, compots, their own wines, like good wines. And they have so much of this damn stuff that they just give it away as presents. Like they never will get through it. And a lot of the young Ukrainians kind of laugh at their parents for doing all this. They're like preppers over in America. But interestingly, was occupied by the Russians. It was this food that kept Vlada's family alive. So like, yeah, they're eating the type of food that in Britain, you would need to be like in a wealthy a middle-class farmer's market to get a hold of. And then when it comes to like heating, right? Mostly they'll make enough money to be able to afford heating, but say they didn't, say it was really expensive, etc. Very worst case, they could go and buy some local wood or chop down trees if it really came to it and chuck it in a log burner in their house, which will keep them warm. Also, if they really can't afford it, the government does subsidize heating for like pensioners. Now, these people, they work a lot. Like it's a hard job, but they do have enough time to like socialize. They know all of their neighbors. They've lived in the same place their whole life. They know literally everyone in their town, and they will have these celebrations. They're very big on their traditions and their celebrations, enjoying their traditional dishes, their culture, and in their houses they do make enough to be able to afford, you know, modern. They have internet. They got 30 megabytes down. It's not bad. Obviously, running water, showers, toilets, all of that stuff, fridges, etc. And these things are expensive for them, and they are going to be like secondhand. And things like fuel might cost half a month's salary. And so I don't want to downplay it. They do have to work incredibly hard. Working a full job and doing the farm is not easy. It's tiring. It's stressful on the body. But I can see visibly from meeting quite a lot of people in this community that a lot of them do seem happier. They feel connected to their community. They feel connected to their culture, to their work. And in these specific communities, there's no crazy wealth inequality. There's not a nice street where everyone's got Mercedes and Bentleys, etc., and nice big houses. Basically, everyone is kind of equally on the same level of wealth. And I think this has a psychological effect on people in that community where they don't feel that they are better or worse than their neighbor. And I don't feel like they feel as alienated from society as like a poor person in Britain would. In Britain, if you're poor, everyone, like the media, the newspapers, the films, just culture at large will have this judgmental attitude to you. Like our society, to be honest, looks down on poor people as like a burden on society. That we call them benefit scroungers, we call them lazy. We consider it like a personal failure of them and that they are a failure of a human.
A new Channel 4 documentary series, Benefit Street, touched a nerve this week. It showed Benefits Britain at its worst. Drink, drugs, shoplifting. There's been complaints to the programme makers, but I can't have been the only person sat at home wondering why my taxes were paying for people to slob out in front of bigger TVs than I'll ever own.
I want to be very clear. I'm not saying someone who is poor in Ukraine is like just running around peace and love, like connected to the land, all this sort of stuff. Their life is hard. It is very tough. And it for sure takes a toll on their body. Their life expectancy is a lot shorter. If they have a serious disease, they do have some public health care, but you know, it's probably not quite as good as the NHS. And like if they're disabled, I mean, in the UK, we actually have really good disability access. It's not even something I thought about. It's actually quite amazing how well we have made Britain accessible for disabled people. Like Vlada's mum was amazed. Like she couldn't believe how many disabled people she saw out in Britain just living their normal lives. This is something we should genuinely be really proud of. And of course, all of the establishment is trying to strip away their payments, etc., because, you know, that's where we're at right now. But if you're disabled in Ukraine, fucking good luck, mate. And so generally their state protections are low. So old people who are pensioners, they may have been very successful in their life. They might have worked really hard, even been professionals and made some good money. But because there's so little state support for them, when they get into that old age, they just, they can never really stop working. It's like a well-known thing that you'll find old ladies in the center of Kyiv selling flowers because their pensions are literally pennies. Like, I know I keep saying it, but I want to be clear. I'm not saying their life is heaven. It is a very hard life, but the difference is when I see a British person living in poverty, I feel genuine pity for them. Like, I see it very often that their life is depriving them of some like basic human dignity and joy. Like, they're just deprived, especially when it comes to like social connection. It just seems cruel. Whereas in Ukraine, I honestly can't say I feel pity for them. I do feel it's unfair how tough their life is, but it just seemed like they were joyful, like they were happy. When I was walking around the garden on a sunny day, we had a barbecue, it was peaceful.
What do you think about Ukrainian food, like not our dishes, but what we eat?
It's not just cheese sandwich or something. You're eating like a bit of everything, which is really nutritious food.
And it kind of makes me reflect on what is it that gives people kind of meaning and purpose in life. And I think it's to do with the fact that they have like a connection to their land. The food they eat, it's high quality. They know a lot about the food. They're connected to their family, their friends, their wider community. And very importantly, they have some agency and some power and ownership over their lives. Like the thing of just simply owning their own house, I can see how that gives a stability. And all of this really made me quite reflective. Like I sat there one day, I just felt like a scholar, and I was kind of reflecting on like, what do we mean when we use the term wealth? Like philosophically, what does wealth mean? And you could argue in some regards that the fact that they're able to own a house and the stability in which that gives them arguably makes them wealthier than poor British people. Like, what is money if it isn't to try and buy you some freedom, some stability, and some ownership over your life? That is why we chase money, because that's what we want. So whilst the British person in poverty might be earning way, way, way more money than them, they have way, way, way less of that feeling. You see, as I'm sat here in Britain romanticising over life in rural Ukraine, very sadly, to be honest, this lifestyle is slowly becoming a thing of the past. As we were driving around Vlada's dad, he was showing us and telling us stories about how this lifestyle is dying. He took us to some small towns. It was very dystopic. Old places that once had a community were just completely dead. What was once a supermarket was now just overgrown with weeds. And he told us there was a handful of people still living in this place. Just old people living off the land and kind of waiting to die. You see, a generation of parents who had kids in the 90s, like Vlada's parents, they were growing up, like they were building their lives whilst the USSR was literally collapsing. And so this had a really big effect on that generation because their savings, their money was completely wiped out. Their currency went to zero, like it was worth nothing. And they developed a deep distrust and a real lack of faith in the government, and in turn developed a belief in self-sufficiency. However, that same USSR government previously kind of was the reason a lot of these towns were kept alive in the first place. Under the way that their centrally planned economy worked was that they created what were called monotowns.
Без металлургических заводов и горно-обогатительных комбинатов.
These were often towns that were sort of solely focused around one industry. It might be a state-owned factory or mine or industrial plant, or it could be like agriculture. And the state propped it up. Like some of these factories were inefficient, like they wouldn't make money, but they were kept open in order to maintain employment and a population in these more remote areas. The USSR government guaranteed wages, housing, education, healthcare to very varying levels of success, but nonetheless, a lot of these towns, their transport was subsidized by the state. Education and even cultural infrastructure like cinemas, libraries, youth clubs. These were supported even in these kind of rural towns to offer a decent alternative life to people who were living in the more urban areas. But you see, when the USSR collapsed, these inefficient factories and farms shut down as Ukraine had to restructure its entire economy. And as the country opened up to global trade and free markets, the capital, Kyiv, began to grow and grow and grow. And it became very, very prosperous. But you see, this prosperity was kind of a double-edged sword because as more private investment came into Ukraine, it tended to focus on the big cities like Kyiv and very much ignored the more rural areas. And so, of course, these rural areas started to decline. And the younger generation that was being raised were becoming less and less likely to want to stay and live in their hometowns, and more likely to go and seek opportunities in Kyiv. And this process of urbanization gave rise to a new type of Ukrainian. Now, it's so interesting to me comparing Britain and Ukraine because Britain has a long-standing tradition of class hierarchies. It's entrenched into our culture. Now, that's the common story of most of the world and most of history. However, you got to remember that the USSR killed off a lot of the Tsars and like their ruling class. And they also killed off a lot of the wealthy and the rich, the private business owners. Them boys did a lot of killing. And also, when the USSR fell, any wealth that people did have was wiped out in the collapse. So you got to picture the 90s in Ukraine as like a complete server wipe in terms of wealth inequality. Everyone was equal. Equally poor, but equal. And so in this period of, post-Soviet collapse, there was like 10 or so years where it was just anarchy. I'm talking crime, mafia, all this sort of shit. And so in this period, right, in this sort of wild west in Ukraine, it led to a new class of people that me and Vlada often refer to as slippery bros. I believe Ukrainians refer to these guys as bariha. Typically, these were like ex-bureaucrats in the USSR who just, when the thing fell, just swept in and bought out all the big businesses, all the factories, loads of land, etc. These lot obviously went on to become very wealthy and would be known as oligarchs. And in Russia, the exact same thing happened. This is where you get people like Putin. This is how he came to power. Now, whilst in the 90s and 2000s, Ukraine was going through lots of corruption, somehow they did manage not to descend into fascism like Russia did. I mean, they could have. It was very touch and go for a bit. You had Russian puppets being installed into the Ukrainian government. There was rebellions, uprisings, etc. But somehow, I don't know how, but Ukraine did manage to move toward democracy and being open to free trade globally. And so all this in this period of time was creating a brand new generation of like young entrepreneurial Ukrainians. Ukrainian parents really put a strong emphasis on the younger generation getting educated. And so in the 2000s to the 2010s, as the internet became more dominant in people's lives, allowing the sharing of culture, and like online trends around fashion, music, food, etc., these young lot now had the ability to go out and create businesses in an economy that was basically untouched. Like, for perspective, until the 2000s, they didn't have restaurants. It was basically this blank canvas, ready and open for people to come in and build something. And so the Ukrainian economy started to grow. And the young people started to have the ability to build a life that was better than their parents. They were starting to build wealth, starting to own things. And this created a very unique power dynamic. Think about it like this, right? In the UK, 1 in 5 pensioners are millionaires. The average wealth of someone aged roughly 55 to 65 is more than 500,000. The 65 to 75 age demographic have a home ownership rate of 80%. Now, when you compare this to the young generation in Britain, the age demographic of 25 to 35 is roughly £66,000. And home ownership rates of 25 to 34 is 40%, and that rate is declining quite fast. And so in our country, it is the old generation who have all of the money, all of the wealth, and in turn, all of the power. Political, economic, and in many ways, cultural power. But in Ukraine, it is basically the opposite way around. It's the young generation who are wealthier and the old people who are poor. So the younger generation is who has the power. And this dynamic has such an effect on so many things you wouldn't even think about. And the one that really stood out to me is how modernized and how like technology focused both their businesses are and their government bureaucracy is. Because their nation grew in the 2000s, they had the opportunity to create all of their governmental systems, all their bureaucracy, to create it digitally. They have this governmental app called Dia. In this app, right, one app that you look at, scan your face, and you're logged in, you can not only pay your parking fines, pay your tax, get your ID, you can even get married in this app. If you want to, you can scan your face and marry someone. And it works unbelievably well. It's incredible. Compare that to dealing with bureaucracy in the UK, right? Even our online governmental apps, in order to log in, say you want to pay your tax, you have to type in a code. Now, where do you get that code, right? Can you log in with your face? No. You have to find some scrap of paper that they faxed to you 3 years ago. And if you can't find that, then to retrieve your code, you need to now call them up, sit in a queue for 20 minutes so that they can resend the piece of paper, and that will take 10 days. And I think it is heavily because the people who hold the power in this country are older people who don't really understand this technology. They also, and I'll probably talk about this in another video, but because they continuously vote for conservative governments who believe in privatization, these governmental apps are often spread across 5 different private companies who don't make them all synergistic and all the apps work together. And so they end up being slow and basically useless. I really do believe that the younger blood that has the power in Ukraine just understand how to do this stuff more logically with one streamlined app as opposed to a million different separate fucking accounts on things. But yeah, whilst that is all well and good, I did start to notice that there is 2 sides of Ukraine. You do have this young generation who are increasingly entrepreneurial and becoming wealthier, but then you do have the very left behind older people who, after the fall of the Soviet Union, these old baboozers basically just earn so little money that they have to work until pretty much they die. 80% of single pensioners, who are very often women in Ukraine, live in poverty. That is as opposed to what was 5.5% of the population pre the Russian invasion, which jumped up to 24.2%. So whilst you have all these young entrepreneurs and CEOs running businesses, right in front of these businesses, you have these old baboozers sat selling flowers. And it seems that unlike here, where the idea of meritocracy and the ideas of social mobility, they just don't really exist here in Britain now. In Ukraine, there is some semblance of genuine social mobility. If you're smart, work hard, and you can get to Kyiv, there is a good chance that you can probably make something of yourself. And this really made me reflect on how different it is here in the UK and how the lack of social mobility really affects just everything in this country. Living in the UK, and I didn't realize this until I traveled more, I have just grown to accept that every single fucking thing in this country wants to extort you for money. You are charged as much money as possible at every single point in your life, and we just kind of accept it. At my gym, right? It's a good gym. I like the gym. They give you a free towel. It was a really nice thing. You come in, you get your towel, you go to the spa, happy days. But then they realize, hang on a second, why are we just giving them towels when we could charge them an additional fee for the towels? So now, when you come in, they ask you, do you have a towel membership? And this is everything. This is everywhere. This is our energy bills. This is our trains. If you want some ketchup or some mayonnaise with your chips, you pay more. The idea of a free parking spot is non-existent. If you want napkins in a restaurant, they're not on the table already, you have to ask for them so they can buy less of them. And like, yeah, food is a really big one. If you go to restaurants, cafes and pubs in the UK, the tables are always sticky, uncleaned. The bathrooms have half a tree of toilet paper littered on the floor. The cashiers at the supermarket, at some point, I don't know if you remember this, they used to pack your bags. Now, they stopped doing that. They make you pack your own bag. All of these things are cost-cutting practices so that the big businesses can make more profit. In Ukraine, it doesn't feel like capitalism has got to that point yet. And it seems as though the people, when they do their work, they still seem to take pride in their work. Like even a small business like a cafe or a little fashion brand, everything is done at the highest quality they can do it. There is a feeling in Ukraine and with their businesses that they would rather do something well and go bankrupt than to feel the shame of doing their job poorly. In the UK, and you will notice this when you come back to the UK when you've been on holiday, our service workers very often, unless you're in a very high-end restaurant, just don't give a single fuck. And like, bro, I'm not being a dick because I get it, right? I used to work in B&Q and I spent about an hour every day hiding between the aisles so I didn't have to answer people. I'm just as complicit, but we have to face facts. It is true. We have bad service quality. But the thing is, right, I don't personally come to the conclusion that it's because British people are just shit and that Ukrainians are like better, more creative and specifically more hardworking than us. I instead analyze it that they are in a very different stage of capitalism than we are. This earlier stage of capitalism, combined with a more collectivist cultural attitude, means that in much of the Eastern European countries, they have yet to allow capitalism to kind of descend like it is here. And it all comes down to the size of businesses, right? So in Ukraine, as their market is growing and expanding, it means that businesses really have to compete in order to win and attract customers. You have to have the really good Instagram marketing. You have to have perfect coffee. You have to have some unique item that makes you stand out. Whereas here, the businesses, the capital has become so big. It has so much control and ownership over the high street and the economy in general that it can't really grow that much more. And so in order to keep growing in profits, which they have to do, that's like the nature of capitalism, instead of growing their profit via innovation and better service quality, they instead cut their costs. They cut the staff. They cut the service quality. They make you pack the bag. They don't give you napkins for free. In Ukraine, they are still capitalistic, but I wouldn't say they are like ideologically neoliberals. For instance, their government still owns their energy supply and it owns natural materials. Their trains, their underground system is still nationalized and it's very cheap. Unlike us, they didn't have some charismatic Margaret Thatcher type character who brainwashed everyone into thinking that the state is evil, that individualism is the most superior thing on earth, collectivism is awful, and that poor people are a burden on society and need to fix their own lives. They never did all that stuff. They were a bit less ideological and a bit more pragmatic. As well, because the cost of living over there is generally reasonable, and that if you are educated, hardworking, etc., you probably will have a good standard of life. You'll probably have some savings. You'll probably have a nice spacious apartment, good healthcare, and be able to afford to eat out sometimes. Obviously, the war has affected this at the moment, but that was the trajectory the country was going in. Whereas here, that isn't the case. And so I have a feeling that somewhere along the lines, right, if you're working some minimum wage job in the UK and they pay you shit, and the owners of the business, you don't know who the fuck they are. They're some shadowy shareholder in the Cayman Islands. You know that the business that you work for doesn't give a single shit about you. And it's not like the job pays you enough money to really afford your rent. And that's combined with just this feeling like when you walk down the street and you see rubbish everywhere, graffiti everywhere, everything's closing and shutting down. You just feel like your country doesn't give a fuck about you. And when you're in that position and you don't feel that there's some social mobility, some fair deal that if I work hard, I will be able to have a better life. And that even if you do earn good money in this country, the bottom line is you probably won't have even as much as your parents did. I think all of these factors has led to a younger generation in this country just feeling demoralized. And so when it comes to their work, and if they're working in service, I do think your effort drops. You don't see the point in doing all this hard work. So yeah, Ukraine really painted that picture for me that we are in a very late stage of capitalism. We're in that final hour of monopoly where the game just fucking sucks because one guy is winning so much. And so many of us are just giving up, whereas Ukraine is in that early stage of capitalism. The first hour of monopoly where everyone's having fun and laughing. And I think that has effects on every single part of their life. Their homes are clean. They are generous to their friends and their family. They have a lot of time for their friends and family. They buy each other presents. They feel embarrassed to go around someone's house empty-handed. They bring them flowers and food. They celebrate their old traditions and their religion just for fun, even if they're not that religious. They just seem a bit more optimistic. And of course, the war has definitely taken a toll on the Ukrainian spirit, but if anything, it's sort of built in more of an identity and more of a resilience amongst them. And so this brings me on to a wider point on culture. My wife Vlada sent me this clip on TikTok of a British guy talking about the difference between Ukrainian nationalism and British nationalism.
But in terms of culture, it's really interesting because one thing that always strikes me is in Britain, we have nationalism and it's a negative thing. It's a terrible thing. It's racism. It's, you know, telling people to go back to where they came from or stop in the boats or whatever it may be. And yet, and that's based essentially, as I understand it, of us being the oppressors the whole time. Whereas I go to Ukraine, who've spent centuries trying to be their own country, and they're so proud of their history and culture and music and dance. And when I think of Ukrainian nationalism, it's just the most wonderful thing.
Now, I'll say what he's talking about in this clip, what he's actually noticed is the difference between patriotism and nationalism. Nationalism tends to be more of like an exclusionary political ideology of sort of seeing your nation as superior, better, and being scared of all outside influence. That isn't how I see the world. But patriotism more means to be really celebratory of your traditions, your country's cultural inputs into the world through food, music, art, and it's a feeling of wanting to look out for other people in your country, working together to improve everyone's life. That's quite a positive thing. And this is the thing that I've often toiled about in like my political work, is that I really want to see us in like this British multicultural society to champion patriotism and a love for the shared project of Britain. I want us to accept that our culture is not fixed and rigid. It can evolve, it can change, and that is inherently a good thing. The evolution and embracing of different cultures is quite literally a core part of the British identity. Our food, our art, our architecture, all were heavily inspired by other nations and other people. One like key example would be sort of ska punk music in the UK. How many times have you seen it in a film where they play like punk music when they show London? It's synonymous. Punk really came from the mix of the Windrush generation, who were Jamaicans, coming to London and working very closely with the working class white local community, working on the docks and in similar professions. They shared and merged their two favorite things, which was Jamaican reggae music and rock music. This combination led to bands like The Specials, which then led to punk. The UK grime scene, which is more my generation, more something I'm into, that took music that came from Ibiza and Detroit. That music evolved into what is known as acid house, which was the backbone of the rave scene. And then black kids from inner city London started rapping over these kind of beats. That creates garage. Jump forward to 2015, you got white middle class mums rapping Shut Up by Stormzy.
State your name, cuz.
Susie.
What we doing today?
We're ripping, isn't it?
We're ripped.
All of that is British culture. Fish and chips came from the Jews. Tea came from the Chinese and the Indians. Badminton came from the Indians. All of that is part of British culture. That is the story of how our culture is developed and how it became so rich. But whilst I can sit here and say I love all that, I also love all of the really old shit. I love our beautiful countryside, all the stately manners. I think our architecture and those beautiful little small towns, I think they're some of the best in the world. I love all of that stuff. I love it deeply and I want to share it. I want others to be able to enjoy it. And I also want to see what they have to offer, what ideas they have. I want to eat a Cornish pasty that has like some spicy Indian filling. I want to go see the Brighton Pavilion, built because some gambling, prostituting regent king decided he wanted to build the bloody Taj Mahal in Britain because fuck it, why not? To me, that is what patriotism is. When I go to Ukraine, I genuinely feel that they actually love their culture and they have a deep desire to share it with the world. They are so open and welcoming. They love when I speak their language. They love when I try their food. My wife's whole Instagram is quite literally me enjoying Ukrainian culture. But what I notice is whilst they love all their old shit, all their old traditions and old clothing patterns and dances, etc., they're not scared of it changing. They're open to modern adaptations. Like there's a whole clothing brand that take all of the old embroidery artwork and put it on modern clothes.
My name is Snow. I'm from the United Kingdom. I've joined the International Legion of Defence and Intelligence of Ukraine. On here for the England, we have the lion at the bottom, which means life, courage and solidarity.
One of their favourite holidays is Easter, which they call Pascha, where they take what's effectively a panettone with a bunch of random food and shit. A priest bless you by splashing water on you. They love it. It's fun as fuck. Every one of their local bakeries will go and bake these Paschas. They'll buy all the equipment and they'll probably lose money doing so, but they do it because they love it. They also are happy to embrace non-Ukrainian things. Like one of Ukrainians' favourite things, one of the things they do best is sushi. They adore it and they do their own Ukrainian twist on it. To me, what is different when I hear about people in Britain who claim to be patriots versus the Ukrainian patriotism is that the Ukrainians are like confident and proud in the merits of their culture and are not scared of embracing change and new things. Whereas often in Britain, that doesn't feel like, when you say a British patriot, that doesn't feel like what you would think of. You think of someone who doesn't like foreigners and is scared of anything changing. And I do see the argument that British culture feels like it's sort of sometimes a bit hollow. Like to me, it feels a lot of our holidays, our like traditional days are just like celebrations of capitalism. I like Easter eggs as much as the next person, but comparing it to all the shit that the Ukrainians do for Easter, all we do is go and buy an overpriced egg from what was once a British company called Cadbury's that is now owned by Americans so that you can give this egg to a work colleague in the office. Christmas is just a holiday of shopping and intense consumerism. You get so stressed from all this shopping that by the time Christmas comes, most people just get fucking sick. On top of that, the British government, it cuts funding to the arts, all of our cultural things. Some of our best cultural outputs to the world is through comedy, film and music, and our government slashed the budget for those things. Our high streets are dying and are often just littered with like chain restaurants, many of which owned by Americans. The local butcher whose dad owned the place and his dad owned it as well, they have to try and compete against Asda. They can just undercut them, delivering a quicker and shitter service. The local independent coffee shops have to compete against Starbucks, who pay 0% of tax in this country and have so much money that they can buy any of the most high demand locations. And like, you know, I don't want to be a total nihilist. I don't want to act like all of our culture is destroyed. This is just not true. But there is certainly a feeling to me that our culture has been cheapened. And most of the best of British culture that still exists is kind of the reserve of old, wealthy, middle class people who have the time and money to enjoy it. Go walk around Amersham, go walk around Hampstead or Chelsea. You will see high quality British culture alive and thriving, but it's only accessible by the rich. And so for the vast majority of Britain, the rest of us, it's Poundland, Costa and Mackey's.
They've run the place down and down and down. And now they're struggling with money so much that last year they were willing to cut funding for school buses, which then meant that kids were having to walk for an hour into school.
You describe Hamilton as a town?
It used to be beautiful, now it's a derelict. Derelict.
And so, as things get more and more expensive, as the state makes very little effort to help young people, experiencing Ukrainian traditions really actually led me to wanting to see more British traditions preserved. I would love to see us putting way more public funding and more holidays given to British people to celebrate our traditional days, to revive old lost traditions, the lost food culture of the past, the lost clothing of the past. I never hear anyone talking about like British cultural revivalism. And I'm also really in favor of us celebrating other cultures' tradition, taking the many different cultural holidays here, adding some funding to it so that it's cheap and easy to enter, and celebrating it with them. And so yeah, like a part of me after experiencing Ukrainian culture just had me jealous that their culture hadn't been completely sold out to American capitalism just yet. They still had some ownership over it.
So even in London, it's today it's some sort of pagan. It's like a Ukrainian tradition that they celebrate. And there's been hundreds and hundreds of people at this event in London where they celebrate like spring, and they've all got the head wreaths. It's amazing. And this is in London. So just as I made a video moaning that Britain doesn't celebrate its festivals and traditions enough, this is a free event in Milton Keynes celebrating like midsummer. So it's like the pagan festival. They've got street food, got music. It's great. It's really cool. I wish I'd do this more. Seems that we sometimes do it. It just isn't super common for everyone to. The difference with the Ukrainians is they all know about it and they will celebrate this sort of stuff. Whereas for us, I didn't even know this was happening until today.
So look, that's the many positive experiences I had with Ukraine. It's a beautiful nation, but obviously with its own problems. Where you go from spending a day out in the sun, eating the highest quality 3-course meal you've ever had for £20, you go to sleep and then you're woken up by sounds of air attacks. Jesus Christ. Fucking hell. Jesus. Jesus Christ. Fuck. Oh yeah. What's that? Jesus. Jesus. The night I left Kyiv, there was a massive attack and we went out and we were seeing them literally shoot down these rockets. You could hear the drones around you. For many Ukrainians, it's this incredibly toxic relationship they have with their own country where during the day it's amazing and they are literally terrorized at night where they can die. The mental strain on these Ukrainian people is fucking awful. And it was that first time when I went to Lviv where I actually heard the first air attack. Well, we had a few days of no attacks. Now there's another one. Vlada's alarm. Yeah.
Try not to die.
There again, more attacks. Putin must be having a slow day.
It's interesting, people just sort of stay out, they're so used to it.
And it really dawned on me that I needed to get Vlada out of there. So basically, we ended up both upending our entire lives to get her to come and live in the UK 6 months after I met her. And she comes to England, with her impression of Britain being Harry Potter and Bridgerton. And then she arrives in Luton Airport and the place doesn't have a fucking ceiling on it. I don't know what it is. In Luton, they just didn't finish the ceiling. I think they pretended it's meant to be like, one of those hipster exposed vents and that. It's insane. When you travel a lot, you start noticing that a lot of countries put effort into their airports to make it welcoming for tourists, to make them go, oh wow, this is a cool country. Britain doesn't do that. You arrive in an Amazon warehouse. But yeah, when Vlada came to this country, it then gave me a new opportunity, a new lens to analyze my own culture through the eyes of an immigrant. Now bear in mind, right, my wife, she has 2 master's degrees. It's pretty impressive. In law and political science, and then she ran her own marketing company, has a good CV, can show all of it, worked with like the big supermarket chains out there. Now, when she came to the country, she wanted to get a job in a British marketing firm. She applied to like quite a lot of jobs and she didn't get a single call back. So what did she do? She decided to try and make her own business. In about 1.5 years, she rebuilt her entire career by making a Ukrainian Instagram of her cooking food and sharing Ukrainian culture with me. And it's been tough. Like, you know, she's been building it slowly. It's getting there. You can check it out. Please do. If you any brands and you want to work with Vlada, go check it out. I'll link her below. But she eventually did start to get brand deals, but only from Ukrainian brands. Now, bearing in mind, yeah, her videos are about Ukrainian culture, but she does a lot about cooking and just culture in general, and she gets very good views, and it's all in English. I started to realize why immigrants tend to stick together. There is a feeling that they often struggle to get employment in British companies, and they find it easier to build their own internal economy. They start to employ each other. The amount of Ukrainian businesses I went to where everyone was Ukrainian, it's very common. People don't complain about it much because they're white. And it feels like on a cultural level and like a state level, we don't really offer a lot to try and help immigrants integrate into wider British society. I read that we had a thing called ESOL, which was a program specifically designed to help people integrate, learn the language more, etc. And that faced a 60% budget cut. All us politicians would moan that immigrants don't integrate into our society. And so this like sticking together becomes like a defense mechanism in order to try and survive. And it's not only bad for social cohesion, but it actually underutilizes their talents and their skills. It's a very common story that you'll have overqualified immigrants working in jobs that are below their abilities. And so they very often set up their own businesses that directly cater to Ukrainians and Eastern Europeans. So it made me reflect that instead of looking at immigrants and thinking they don't want to integrate into our society, oftentimes they want to. Often they have tried, but we don't really provide a great deal of support for that.
Vlada, be honest, as a refugee into Britain, how have you found it trying to integrate into our culture?
It's hard. Yeah, I sent lots of job applications and got no response, which made me feel like I'm different, which made me instantly want to meet more Ukrainians and join more Ukrainian clubs and Ukrainian communities, because I don't want to be a black sheep, so you stick to what you know.
Now, I want to get on to the very final bit, right? Final chapter, we're nearly there. I just want to summarize how Ukraine really did change my life. Getting married for me was the best decision of my life. I'm incredibly happy. Vlada has changed my life in many, many ways. Made me a more fulfilled person who experiences and enjoys the world more. Before I met her, I was really just a guy making videos in my bedroom, going to the gym, doing a bit of sports and eating chicken and rice. It was, I believe they would call this monk mode. And through Vlada and going to Ukraine, it also taught me a lot about life and the world. I experienced a different way of seeing the world. Ukraine taught me a lot of things. It taught me that wealth isn't about money. It's about dignity, community, and ownership. And whilst in Britain we once had that, it is slowly slipping away. But maybe, just maybe, there is something we can learn from a war-torn country. A country whose people haven't given up yet, who are fighting right now, literally, to keep the life that fills them with so much purpose. The war in Ukraine is evil, it's awful. I didn't want to talk too deeply on it. Good people are being killed right now for the ego of some insane dictator who managed to brainwash his entire population into thinking that the people of the nation next door to them are its enemy and not the elite who are actually in control of Russia. So I want to end this by saying, look, I'll chuck a link below. You can donate to the Ukrainian army. Might even chuck one in there for a Ukrainian cat charity. They're pretty chill. They're fighting right now to defend their country, to defend democracy, and to defend their way of life. So, you know, Slava Ukraine. That was my absolute monologue. I hope you enjoyed it. Love you all. Catch you in the next one. Peace.